Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, where we'll be talking about planning your 2027 compliance budget. My name is Neil Magenheim, Senior Vice President of Sales at LRN, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will send the recording to everyone who registered after the session. In addition, all registrants will receive a post-webinar survey, so please fill that out with some thoughtful feedback and notes so we can continue to bring amazing sessions like this to market. If you have any questions throughout today's discussion, please submit them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. I will be monitoring questions throughout the webinar and address them where they fit naturally into the conversation. If we don't get to your question live, we'll definitely follow up afterward. You'll also see a few polls during today's discussion. We encourage everyone to participate because your responses will help shape the conversation and provide insight into what's happening across the compliance community. And finally, today's session is intended to be interactive, so feel free to share your thoughts in the chat throughout the discussion. So as compliance leaders begin planning for 2027, many are facing the same challenge. Expectations to continue to grow, risks are becoming more complex, and resources aren't always keeping pace. Between AI governance, evolving regulations, third-party risk, increasing scrutiny from boards and leadership, and the pressure to demonstrate business value, building a compliance budget today looks very different than it did just a few years ago. And that raises an important question. How do you build a compliance budget that prepares your organization for tomorrow's risk while demonstrating measurable impact today? And that's exactly what we're going to explore over the next hour together. I'm beyond excited to be joined by two amazing, accomplished compliance leaders who bring different perspectives and experiences to today's discussion. Joining us is Cricket Snyder, Chief Compliance Officer at the Jefferson County Commission, where Cricket leads ethics and compliance initiatives in the public sector and has extensive experience helping organizations navigate evolving regulatory expectations while building a culture of integrity. We're also joined by Shirley Zhang, Global Compliance Director at Dover Fueling Solutions. Shirley leads global compliance initiatives for a multinational organization and brings valuable insight into managing compliance across diverse regulatory environments and global business operations. Cricket and Shirley, thank you so much for being here today. I know I'm looking forward to a candid conversation. I'm sure our audience is as well. And we're looking to dig in and learn more about how you're approaching your compliance investments, prioritizing resources, and preparing your organizations for the future. Before we dive into our discussion, I'd like to hear from the audience. We're going to put up a poll here, so please interact with it. Over the past 1 to 3 years, has your compliance budget increased, decreased, remained about the same? Right. Wow, it's always interesting to see where everyone lands, whether budgets have increased or stayed the same. I think most of us would agree that expectations continue to grow. Over the next hour, we're going to explore not only where compliance leaders are investing, but how they're making the case for those investments and preparing for what's ahead. So, discussion topic 1, the compliance investment landscape has changed. So if we all think back, maybe just 3 or 4 years together, the compliance landscape looked very different. Today, we're talking about AI governance, AI ethics, AI everything. Right? Third-party oversight, geopolitical macroeconomic uncertainty, data ethics, and much greater expectations from executive leadership and boards. Compliance leaders were all being asked to think more strategically about where we should invest these limited resources. With that being said, starting to frame the conversation a little bit, Cricket, I'd love to start with you. When you think about planning for 2027, what's fundamentally different today compared to when you were building compliance budgets maybe just a few years ago?
Yes, Neil. I, to be honest, especially being in the government sector, I think to your point, we are being asked throughout all compliance to oversee more risk, we're asked to provide more data, advise leadership earlier, monitor emerging technologies, and demonstrate some type of measurable impact. And we're all asked to do that with the same number of individuals on our team. So we're not given any additional resources. For me, with the organization, I have been I don't see that there has been necessarily a change in what we're looking at as it relates to just asking for more budget dollars. However, that does not mean that we're not seeing those emerging risks such as AI governance and things of that nature. But what it means for me is that I have to be a bit more intentional about where I use the dollars that are given to me. And so I am looking more so about not necessarily adding more programs, but more about asking what investments can I invest in that will reduce the risk for our organization. That has had to be the top of mind over the last 3 to 5 years. And that's because, again, before this, Neil, it was more so like, okay, you need to maintain this program. You need to maintain that culture. You need to maintain. Now we're having to stretch that. And so I have to prioritize. And that prioritization looks like doing those risk assessments and determining what can I utilize my dollars for that will make the most sense for our organization going forward.
Amazing insight, Cricket. Demonstrate measurable impact. 3 key words that I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more as our conversation continues to unfold today. Shirley, how does that compare with what you're seeing from a global perspective? Are there certain newer or fresher priorities or conversations that are shaping your budget discussions today that maybe weren't even on the radar just a few years ago?
Yes, Neil. There's a lot new things that we did not see in the past 12 or 24 months. As you and Craig mentioned earlier, I'm pretty sure AI governance or AI data ethics is definitely a new area we didn't touch before, given the wave of the new AIs, right? And also given the geopolitical uncertainty and conflicts in certain areas, third-party due diligence, especially on the risky countries, risky orders, know your customer, that will be to a new high level that we did not discuss previously, or we did not see that in the previous risk assessment. So this is really prevailing, I'll use that word, in the past 12 months, given the new risk has been as an emerging risk for us, not only as a local company, but also as a global company as well. The reason I'm saying that is everyone is in this big environment, right? Nobody can be, waived from it.
Yeah, amazing. AI, third-party risk management, knowing your customer, risk assessments. This is the narrative. These are the conversations we're having that are important to help justify and quantify investments that organizations are making. And there's one thing that we know for certain in this space is the ever-evolving landscape that absolutely must go right in order for us to achieve what we're looking to achieve, and making sure we are mitigating risk, whether it's financial risk or reputational risk. So great insight there, Shirley. And I think as we've talked about how the compliance landscape has evolved dramatically over the last few years, I'd love to get everyone's perspective before we move into measuring impact, which is where we started taking the conversation. But in your view, why is compliance typically viewed as a cost center? Is it because there's slower time to market for product launch or new hires? Is it because of high headcount spent on repetitive tasks? Is compliance brought in too late in the cycle? Policies are too hard to understand and manage and interpret? So please take a second to put your thoughts here in the poll. Oh, wow. High headcount spent on repetitive task compliance. These results are pretty telling from my perspective, whether it's because compliance is viewed as a regulatory requirement or because its impact can be difficult to quantify. One thing is clear. Organizations are expecting compliance leaders to do more than simply check the box. They're being asked to demonstrate measurable business value, like Cricket was talking about earlier, demonstrating that measurable impact. So let's talk about how you actually do that. Discussion point 2 is we're going to talk about moving away from activity metrics and start thinking more about data-driven impact metrics. Historically, compliance programs have done a great job measuring activity, completion rates, policy acknowledgements, hotline reports, investigations completed. Those metrics are still important. They are still important, but today, executive leadership is asking a different question. And in a data-driven world, it's important that we are able to get our arms around data to be able to demonstrate some of these questions that we're being asked as compliance professionals. Is the program actually reducing risk? Is the program actually changing the behavior that we're looking to change? Increasingly, compliance leaders are being asked to demonstrate measurable business value. So Shirley, I'd love to start with you here. When you're discussing budget priorities with senior leadership, what metrics or data points resonate the most?
Yes, Neil, that's a great question. I always like to use the word risk appetite. What's the real risk we're talking about, right? We always want to combine the business risk with the compliance risk. So I always recommend my leadership team, like, let's do a risk assessment, compliance risk assessment, by combining the business risk together. So do a heat map. So a heat map means, by region. So what's the risk by region? So the risk in Asia probably is different than the risk in North America, and versus the risk in EMEA region or the Latin America, right? So risk appetite by region is definitely something you want to take into consideration. That's A. And B is a risk heat map. We talk a lot about the compliance risk assessment, but what's the real risk we're talking about? We probably want to do a impact versus likelihood risk map, right? We need to point it out what's the impact, and also on the other side, what's the likelihood to that. So with that will help us to prioritize our budget and also our priorities as well. I keep saying that. I'm pretty sure you and especially Cricket, she will agree with me. As a compliance officer, we have a lot on our plates already, right? So setting up priorities is definitely a must to do, and always bear that in mind. Combine the business risk with the compliance risks together through a thorough discussion. And I see there's a very heated discussion in the chat box as well. And I think Diana, she also mentioned that in the earlier compliance is brought into the cycle, the more are the chances to organize the framework in a cost-efficient way. So I really like that because, like I said, we always want to make sure that we combine the business risk together with the compliance risk. The earlier we talk, the earlier we understand the risk appetite, the better, right? So I'll use one example. Because of the geopolitical uncertainty, a lot of times, we see new risk that we never seen before. I'll use one example. Everyone know that there's some geopolitical conflict earlier this year, right? In certain regions, so the cost increased dramatically. And also, for example, sanctions and tariff, it's a hot topic, but it's never to a level that we discussed today. So like I said, you always want to make sure that, you discuss in the heat map and also the likelihood and the impact. All right, well, back to you, Neil.
Shirley, amazing. So much there we could just continue a conversation around. Definitely want to get Cricket's opinion on this in a second. But one thing that really stood out to me there, Shirley, is how you talk about incorporating business risk with compliance risk. And I think that that's such an important aspect of the conversation, is having those broader conversations amongst the organization where it's less siloed and more harmonized, if you will, across the organization. I just think that loose formula of business risk plus compliance risk, what that outcome looks like. So very interesting insight there. And Cricket, as we transition it over to you, how are you measuring success beyond maybe some traditional metrics, if you will, around completion rates and participation metrics?
Yes, I will say this. I wish I had Shirley early on in my career because, a lot of the things that she just said would have helped me. I have a story that I wanted to share with you guys because early on when I started in compliance, I remember having an opportunity to present the data since I had taken over the compliance reins within the organization with our COO. And I went into that meeting very, very confident because I had some really good numbers. So I thought. So I go in and I am talking to our COO, and I am letting him know, since I've been leading the compliance office, we saw about a 32% decrease in the investigation cases. We've seen, not a lot of calls or anything like that. I had increased the education that the organization was getting by way of emails, by way of going to staff meetings and things of that nature. And so I literally gave that awkward pause for applause, because I just knew he was going to be extremely excited about me being able to talk about this 32% decrease. And he literally looked at me and said, that sounds good, but can you tell me if the 32% decrease is because of something you did, or is the 32% decrease because they don't know who you are? They don't feel comfortable to contact you. They are not comfortable with your team investigating. And when I tell you, it was I was so deflated, but I'm so also very thankful for that moment, because that's when the light bulb came on for me, that I can't just talk about numbers. I can't just talk about activities. That's when it kind of I realized that activity tells what you did, but impact tells if it actually mattered. And I don't believe that I would have gotten that had I not had that experience of him challenging that 32%. He challenged it and I understood, which meant the next time I came in for my meeting, I was going to be able to have some type of clear connection as to whether the actions that me and my team put forth, whether it actually had an impact or not. And so, again, had I listened to Shirley early on, I would have probably went into that meeting a little bit more prepared. But as a result of that, that's where I think the light bulb went off for me as to how I am supposed to present data to our leaders.
What a great story! I so vivid. I could picture myself sitting in that office with you as you're going through the 32% cricket. So just I love that. You said so many things that resonated with me, and I hope the audience as well. But I wrote down one quote there: activity represents what you did. Impact represents, did it matter? And that's just it's resonating so deeply with me. I hope the rest of the audience as well. And I think that one of the themes that we're hearing today is that the future belongs to organizations that could connect those compliance investments to measurable business outcomes. Mm-hmm. Did it matter? Did we change the behavior? All those different things that go into the conversation that we're having. And before we move into how leaders prioritize those investments, I'd like to put up another poll here so we can hear from our audience. And how can compliance transition from gatekeeper to growth enabler? Linking compliance metrics to business KPIs, focusing on the why rather than just the rule, sharing risk data openly to empower better decisions. Let's give a minute here for the audience to give their opinion on the poll. Do appreciate the chat. We certainly don't have all the answers as it relates to hypothetical responses in the poll. So I definitely love the additional context there. So let's keep that rolling. I love the why, big why guy. So these responses to me reinforce something that we're hearing across the industry. Compliance is increasingly expected to be a strategic business partner, not simply a function that reviews decisions after they're made. But with that expanded role comes some maybe difficult conversation and question. When resources are limited, where do you invest first? So what I'd like to do is transition the conversation a little bit to talking about how we can think about prioritization. Every compliance leader, I think, has more priorities than budget. And the challenge isn't necessarily identifying the risk, it's deciding where limited resources will have the greatest impact. So Cricket, I'm going to pose this question to you. What's the framework you use when prioritizing investments across your compliance ecosystem?
So for me, I definitely use a risk-based framework. Like you've said, I've learned that every compliance leader definitely has more needs than we have budget. So the question really doesn't surround what would I like to fund. It's typically around where can compliance create the greatest reduction of some type of organizational risk. So just a few questions that I ask myself when I'm trying to prioritize those budget dollars is this addressing something that is one of our highest enterprise risk? Can this prevent issues, or will it simply help us respond after they have occurred? And then also, what happens if we don't make this investment over the next 12 to 24 months? And if I'm being honest with the audience, I use this one quite a lot. I am that person that they're going to say, okay, she's going to go. What if this happens, and the ifs, and, where are we able to mitigate X, Y, or Z? And so, and to be honest with you, I start that one because over the last 2 to 3 years, I've gotten the biggest impact from those that are in charge of giving me those budget dollars when I do and am able to articulate the issues that could be coming right around the corner.
Wow. Articulate issues coming around the corner. I'm just writing that down because that is an amazing line right there, Cricket, that if you could build a framework around that, that's a pretty remarkable position to find yourself in. So great insight there. Shirley, I'd like to get your perspective here, and maybe we could start by understanding how you might balance regulatory requirements with those emerging risks that we started talking about that may not yet have clear guidance. You talked a little bit about KYC, know your customer, earlier. We've heard a lot about AI. I think there might be an over-under in how many times AI is said on this webinar. Supply chain risk, third-party risk management, geopolitical uncertainty. How do you balance all of that?
Yeah. Yes, Neil. So it's a lot. To echo what I mentioned earlier, and I am not afraid to say that in a little bit more blunt way, is all the compliance officers are under the pressure now. There's lots of new things, a lot of emerging risks that had never been discussed or thoroughly discussed or have a clear guidance before in the past 12 months. We are all under that pressure. So I keep saying that, and I want to say that loud as well, is we have to prioritize things. That's A. And B is we always want to make sure that what is the top priority. Because maybe a lot of emerging risk that we don't have a clear guidance yet. So like I said, I want people to talk about that. Compliance officer, talk with your business leaders, right? A, to understand, like what Cricket said, if I don't do that now, what's the risk we're talking about? That's A. But B is, what's the short-term plan? And what's the long-term plan? From a short-term perspective, what we need to do probably is to stop bleeding at first, right? Because there's a risk. We need to stop bleeding. We need to stop it at first. But from a long-term perspective, how we plan that to mitigate the risk. We need to leverage the business support, operation, engineering, supply chain, finance, right? We need to group them as a team to discuss the long-term plan. I'll use a sole supplier as an example. The reason why I'm using that one as an example is we have experienced the sanctions and the tariffs to a high level that we never encountered before in the past 12 months, right? For example, EU, UK, they issued different packets regarding the sanctions against certain countries or certain entities, right? And because of that, we are experiencing a lot of supply chain management. So short-term solution is we probably need to stop it from a sanction perspective. But long-term, how we make sure that we mitigate the risk. So that's the reason why we need different team support. We need engineering team support, because if we replace this vendor, from this region. What kind of specs we're talking about, what kind of drawings we're talking about, can we meet the business needs, right? So all these kind of stuff, we need to make sure that we work as a team to mitigate the risk. And also, sole supplier, and I keep raising this topics to my compliance officers. Sole suppliers is definitely a hot topic, and we want to make sure that we bring the more people to talk about that. I keep saying that the more we talk, the more we discuss about the risk, the lower the risk we're exposed to, because people are aware of that and people are talking about that. I think this is the biggest takeaway that I would like to share, how we balance the regulatory requirements with the emerging risks.
I just can't help but imagine myself, Shirley, in one of those conversations with you, and how great of a communicator you are, but also how you're listening and making this a team approach. It's not, it's not a reactive compliance function. It's a proactive business decision that you're collaborating with your business. You said many different business teams, right? But you also said a lot about talking and engaging, which I think is so powerful to help change the dialogue around a little bit. So maybe a little bit of rapid fire here. I'll start with Cricket. Maybe you could share with the audience at a high level, how has your organization, if at all, how has their risk appetite changed over the past several years?
So again, like you said, Neil, there's no it's no count of how many times we're going to say AI in this webinar. And so, but for us, and again, I just want to be very transparent with our audience. Government moves at the snail of a pace, the snail's pace. So everything has always been just a little bit behind the 8 ball. However, I feel that over the last couple of years, we've had to really get outside of our comfort zone and address some of those issues as it relates to AI governance, and not just closing our eyes and saying, it'll go away. That's been one of our biggest things to talk about. If it's here and we know employees are using it, what is going to be our policy or our governance related to it? Because we have the responsibility of protecting our citizens' data. And so trying to make sure that we are taking the appropriate steps to mitigate while not being so closed-minded to how fast AI is moving and improving and all of those things. And so we've had to really, look into that and try to put a lot more of our time, resources and thought and how to deal with that within our organization. Because again, understand for government, sometimes we don't even have the appropriate technology to deal with some of the things that are emerging, even with AI, and some of the things that could even make our business better. We don't have the necessary technology that flows well with those systems that are out there. And so really looking at what that technology investment is going to look like and what that governance looks like for our organization at this particular time.
So interesting. And Shirley, I'd love to get your perspective. And I'm sure most of the audience knows both Shirley and Cricket, and I'm so fortunate to be speaking with them today. They both are very well accomplished in their field, but they both represent two kind of unique points of view, just given the organizations that they're working for. So Shirley, I'd love to get your perspective from how your organization, the risk appetite has changed over the past several years.
Yeah, Neil. So I think, like I said, because of the emerging risk has changed in the past 12 or 24 months, that's the reason why the business risk appetite changed a lot. Like I said earlier, in different industries, oil and gas, manufacturing, pharmaceutical, right? So all these industries has been updated with this emerging risk. So to me, the more discussed, like I said, I keep emphasizing that the more we discuss, the more we understand what's the risk appetite, we are okay. And I see a very heated discussion in the chat box. And let me read that. I really like it. So it might be useful to mention that whatever risk appetite is adopted, top management has to make the final decision on accepting the risk appetite, understand its consequence. I like that. And also, I think Kimberly also mentioned that this is exactly what we did. What we do, senior executive management has to accept the risk. That's the reason why I keep saying that. What changed the risk appetite is we need to talk about that. We need to talk about the unknown. This is the key, right? Because if you do not put a real business case by combining the real business situation, you will not understand what's the real business risk you're talking about.
It's such a great point, and Kimberly is definitely not a plant in the audience, and the timing of that statement is so timely, because it leads me to the next question, which is, what type of stance is executive leadership taking here, Cricket and Shirley, as far as being more proactive about where they might want you to focus, or being more proactive in having a seat at the table? Do you see that there's some trends as far as the proactivity versus what might have been reactive historically?
So for me, yes, yes, but I also feel like for my organization, again, it goes back to something we said earlier, is their appetite is only as much as I can articulate to them. So I have to make sure that I'm able to articulate what that appetite should and could be as it relates to our operational business. Again, we the executives have been more vocal about, hey, we want you to give us more information. We want you to, have a seat at that table. But I don't know that it has allowed them to say, I'm going to accept said risk. And so I have to work on my end to ensure that I am able to provide them with past data, what's going on in other organizations and governments, how that impacts us, where are our operations similar, and how is this going to possibly affect us? How is it going to deal with our reputation? How is it going to deal with our finances? All of the things. And so, though I feel that the executives are saying, okay, compliance, come on in, you do have said seat at the table, it's still not because they necessarily always see the operational risk or culture risk for that matter, but it's because they have an expectation that, okay, compliance is the thing that we have utilized in the past to kind of help us on preventative measures, but they're not coming out of the gate with, here is what it is. They're literally relying on the compliance professionals to put that out, to let them know what should keep them up at night and all of the things.
So interesting. And you talked about risk in a couple very eloquently there, Cricket. Two things that stood out to me: reputational risk and financial risk. And I think they kind of work in harmony together. Mm-hmm. And if there is reputational risk, what impact does that have on the business? Gosh forbid some type of anti-money laundering matter happens within an organization. Are big banks or big organizations going to want to continue to invest there, right? Things like that. So it's always just so interesting. Mm-hmm. Real quick, Shirley, over to you about the posture you're experiencing as it relates to what reactive or proactive role your executive leadership is taking here.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think, the more I view, or my team view themselves as a business partner, compliance business partner, instead of a police, right, gatekeeper, the more proactive the business team will be. The reason why I'm saying that is, you always want to combine the business risk with compliance risk together. We are a team, right? We need to work and connect together like this way. So people can understand, people are willing to talk, and they feel comfortable and confident to share with you what's their concern. And because that will be a very great journey for both business and compliance team as well, right? So the more we discuss, the more proactive the business team will be, because they will say, hey, I have this situation. I would like to understand from you guys. To echo what one of the attendants from this webinars mentioned, the earlier you brought compliance team in, right, the more cost efficient we can be. So we can share, we as compliance team, we can share more our data, like Cricket said, we can share more our data, the market trends, the emerging risk we see on the market, or the trend from the similar peers on the industry, right, to the business team. Then business team can be more alerted and they can be more proactive by share the real business case to compliance team. So the two team can build a bridge together and work together by saying, hey, you know what, let's work together. Or maybe we don't know the risk yet because the risk is still remote, but we can discuss that and prepare ourselves. So when the real risk is really coming, actually we discuss that and we have a short-term plan and we have a long-term plan.
Neil, if you don't mind, one of the things that I wanted to bring out about something that Shirley said that I was a student of the business on with a panel that she and I and Kim Boom Pham was on a couple of months ago. And it goes back to what you're saying and what Shirley is bringing on home here. We need to work together, but the way Kim brought it together, she said she felt like you should look at compliance teams in a different manner. So instead of just having your compliance professionals, make sure you have somebody on that team from the supply chain department, from the IT department. So, all of these people, so that it's not just your team, it's just compliance policy focused. You have all of this information and that you can have somebody real on the ground to be able to say how your policies or how this mitigating circumstance may affect the business of supply chain, how it may affect the business of the operations in IT, how it may affect the business of operation in sales. And because you work together and have that group of individuals already set up on your team, the dynamic just really changes that conversation. And Shirley talked about that today. That was something that Kim brought out. And it was just such a phenomenal thing because I've always set up, even in the past organizations where I was like, hey, we have this liaison and hey, we can always go talk. But when she brought in the thought process of having them actually on your team or having a dotted line to your team and being able to talk to them real time to see, hey, here are the risks. Here are some of the things that compliance feel will mitigate it. How will it really affect your operation? Because also having that conversation and taking that to the board or taking that to the commission really does also go a long way.
It's so interesting. Compliance business partner, impacting and affecting the business, having a liaison. To me, it's not only what posture is senior leadership taking, what posture is the compliance function taking? I think gone are the days of compliance being a reactive aspect of the business. It should be proactive. You should be having proactive conversations. You don't want there to be a certain stigma about the compliance function within any given organization because that's going to inherently build bad behavior potentially and build barriers between the organization and the compliance function. And I subscribe to the fact that the most ethical and compliant cultures are the ones that they use that ethical and compliant culture as a business advantage to the organization and helps get in front of all these things and have the most positive impact and effect on the business. So all very good things. Thank you for that. And I think just to kind of transition to the last and final topic discussion, I hope we're all picking up this theme here that ultimately every budgeting decision is kind of a little bit of a bet on the future, thinking about what Shirley and Cricket just laid out as far as some of the unknowns. How do we peek around the corner a little bit? And we're able to do that, but we just don't know. There's a lot of emerging risks. There's a lot of emerging areas for us to be thinking about here. But I would think it's tough to decide not only how to address today's risks, but also how to prepare for the risks that are still emerging. And I think that brings us to our final discussion point here, which is preparing for the next wave of risk. And I think one of the challenges of the most effective budgeting programs and cycles isn't necessarily planning for today's risks. It's preparing for risks we haven't fully encountered quite yet. And as we think about 2027, organizations are already investing in AI governance, workforce, AI literacy and fluency. third-party oversight, ethical behaviors as it relates to data and AI. You talked earlier, Cricket, about the policy and making sure that you have responsibility as it relates to protecting data and the impact that that has. Organizations are thinking about how they measure the culture. Organizations are thinking about the regulatory evolution. It's constant, right? We all know it's a constant evolution. But I think that perhaps the biggest challenge is preparing for the unknown. And I think the more we discuss these emerging risks, the more conversations we're having in a more proactive stance and learning from one another as a compliance industry in a forum like this, but also within our organizations, I think the better prepared we're all going to be. So Shirley, as we think about looking ahead, outside of what I was talking about, or maybe you can elaborate a little bit, what emerging risks concerns you the most as you think about the next few years?
I think there are a couple. One is the AI governance. I know that AI is a really hot topic, and in the recent seminars or webinars, and also like compliance conference, everyone is talking about that, because you can see that in a lot of companies, they even change their logo or slogan, like partnering with AI, right? But regarding the AI governance, how we make sure that the data ethics, the governance, and also the accountability, I believe those are the emerging risks or concerns that we don't have an answer, and we need to keep exploring that. That's A. And B is, I think, given a lot of geopolitical uncertainty, we can definitely see that regulatory evolution, geopolitical conflicts will be a new trend that we will see as a risk as well. Like you said, the biggest risk is unknown risk, right? So I think these are like we don't have an answer today, but I think what we need to do is keep discussing that, try to understand, and also back to my point, back to the discussion points too, is we need to keep aligned. What's the strategic or risk appetite we're going to adopt? I think these are the risks we're talking about. We don't know.
So interesting, and I love your perspective on that. And again, what I love about Shirley and Cricket is different perspectives on these very, very important topics. And I think, Cricket, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but you talked about working in the public sector and what that can mean from a sense of urgency and how things can move slow or quick, or however things work on your perspective, but which could be a little tricky for you. So I'm curious, are there areas where you're thinking about or even advocating for investment today because you believe they will become critical over the next several years?
Yeah, so I think Shirley did an amazing job talking about the ethical data analysis. So that is one of the things that I am focusing on. But another thing that is heavy on my radar is culture. The workforce, especially in public servants, is changing. And so we're going from a mature workforce who they have been here 20, 30 years. They are the holders of a lot of information, a lot of the backstory. They can, there's no scenario that you can run by these individuals that they have not seen or that they may be able to provide some type of resolve to. We're going from that organization to a much younger and different organization. And one of the things that I am challenging and currently challenging my team with is how can our compliance framework have an impact on this new generation? What can we begin to do now so that, we can even have some type of leverage and influence on the behavior and things of that nature? And so for me, that's one of the biggest things in future investments that I have been talking to our leadership about, how to be innovative in those in that nature.
Wow. Just the way you crystallize that theory, Cricket, going from the more mature workforce to the next generation, if you will, and the impact that this conversation has on that generation it's got a massive ripple effect. I would think it's not just the framework of a program, but then if we wanted to get into the weeds, you start thinking about modalities and how do these folks like to interact with policies and training and a speak up culture, all those different things. It's just so interesting. We could probably have a whole nother separate session on that, but the way you laid that out really stood out to me. So thank you for that. Before we close, my favorite part of the webinar is we do a little bit of a quick lightning round. Short answers, knee-jerk reactions, first instinct. Love to hear what's top of mind for each of you. And Cricket, I'm going to start with you. What investment has generated the greatest return for your compliance program over the last few years?
Building trust. Coming into the government because of the way this program was set up, building trust has been the best ROI for us, because if the employees don't trust compliance, they won't report concerns.
Amazing. And that's not an investment in hard dollars, right? That's a cultural investment you're making in
Correct.
people and being able to build and develop that trust. That's amazing.
That's
Shirley,
right.
what's your thoughts on that? On your great
so business-oriented compliance risk assessment discussion. That's the biggest return or greatest return for my compliance program.
Understanding kind of what's in front of you and what your baseline is, so you can prescribe accordingly, I would think. It's great. Okay, Shirley, what's one area you're advocating to invest more heavily in for 2027?
Understand the business risk, then align the compliance risk.
Cricket?
Compliance, analytics, and AI governance.
Very nice. If you could redesign one part of your compliance budget from scratch, what would you do differently? Start with you, Cricket.
Because I work in the government, I would invest earlier in technology.
Shirley?
Pretty similar, but I still want to understand more on the business needs. So every year if I can redo that, I want to go more in depth on my compliance risk assessment together with my business team.
When you're requesting additional resources, what arguments resonate most with your executive leadership? Start with you, Shirley.
Strategic risk alignment.
Cricket?
Reputation, protecting reputation, and preventing fraud.
Interesting. What a dynamic! It's just I love the different perspectives here. And then finally, last lightning round question. Start with you, Cricket. How are you measuring success beyond completion rates and participation metrics?
So what I often look for as an indicator on my end is if we've done an investigation and we have corrective actions, are they actually being completed? Because we can always put that out there. And to me, it determines what type of influence we have if those things actually are being completed. I look at repeat findings. What is it that we're not doing or not saying, or what are we not hearing and listening to our organization on if we're having somewhat of a repeat finding? And then that investigation cycle. Also, behaviors. One of our biggest risk here in government is trying to deal with things on the inside before it goes on the outside. So I am looking to see how many issues have we received and resolved, and if any of those issues, went outside of our organization. So I look at the behavior cycle for our employees, and then strategically, what are we doing to be able to show a stronger ethical culture and increased leadership confidence in how they lead and how they have an ability to influence the culture as well.
Love that. Shirley, how are you measuring success beyond completion rates and participation metrics?
Yeah, I think, I'm a huge fan. Instead of my team talking about compliance, I view this as a huge success is my business folks, my commercial folks, my operation folks, they talk about compliance instead of me talking about compliance. That's the huge success I view that, measuring success.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Shirley and Cricket, for that. So as we wrap up today's discussion, I'd like to leave everyone with 3 key takeaways. Curious to get everyone's perspective on this. But first, compliance investments should be informed by an organization's evolving risk profile, supported by data and analysis, rather than relying primarily on historical budget allocations, which I think that takeaway came through pretty loud and clear. And as Cricket and Shirley just so eloquently closed out their comments, measuring activity is no longer enough. Executive leaders want to understand the business impact. And then finally, I think the most successful compliance programs won't simply respond to change. They'll invest ahead of it by building culture, like Cricket was just talking about, building trust. Thinking about capabilities, understanding the governance that prepares their organization for what's next. I am so fortunate. I cannot thank Cricket and Shirley enough for joining myself and LRN today. Amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'd love to thank the audience for participating. I love the chat and the poll responses, so thank you for that. And I'd like to remind everyone that the recording will be shared, and I encourage everyone to join LRN for our future webinar events going forward. So with that, thank you all so much for your time, and this concludes our webinar for today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.